difficult students, starting with particularly the student who is the been there, done that, or potentially knows more than you do about the topic. Okay? A couple of things to know. First and foremost, as an educator, you need to know what the students need to know, and you need to know 1 or 2 levels above that. Okay? That's why when we talk about in assessing or doing your lesson plans and all that stuff, the very first thing you do is kind of evaluate your audience. Who am I going to teach? What kind of knowledge they're coming with? What do I need to teach them? So if I give you an EMT, or let's start basic. I'm giving you, you're going to teach a basic first aid class. And the topic, you're only teaching one topic, and you're going to teach about airway and airway management to a basic first aid class. And these people are, some of them are daycare workers, some of them are from churches, they are just the lay public. What do you need to know? What do they need to know? You can look at the objectives, okay? But think about it. What objectives do you think they need to know about airway management? Somebody give me. Be more specific.
When you do it, when you not do it.
Okay. When to do something with the airway, when not to do something with the airway. Okay, I'm good with that. What about do what? Okay, how? The lay public, how are they going to, what are they going to have at their disposal? Their hands and gloves. They're not going to, we don't need to know about oropharyngeal airways, nasopharyngeal airways. That is totally above and beyond them. Okay? So that also means they don't need to know about blind insertion airways. They don't need to know about intubations. They definitely don't need to know about cricothyrotomies. All right? So as an instructor going in to teach this particular class, I need to know the indications and contraindications, when to do it, when not to do it. And notice I changed the terms because of the group I'm talking to. They don't know what indications and contraindications are, but when to, when not to do it. They get that. All right? So I'm going to teach them when to do it, when not to do it, what they have to work with, which is their hands and gloves. Okay? So that's what I'm going to teach them. I need to know that, and I need to know that like the back of my hand because I'm getting ready to teach it. But I also need to know a couple of steps beyond that. So I do know that it can progress to a nasopharyngeal airway, an oropharyngeal airway, and probably a bag valve mask, and maybe a pocket mask. That's one level above where they need to know. That's all you need to know. You don't have to know more than that. You just need to know, what they need to know, and one level above it, maybe 2. Because what that does is that gives you that cushion of what if you get that student that asks, well, oh, my boyfriend's an EMT and he has these other things, that he uses, and you can say, well, yeah, it's called oropharyngeal airway, and or whatever. They ask you about that, and you're like, for starters, you don't want to confuse the class, so you're like, you know what, it's a little above where we need to talk, but catch me, and I'll be happy to explain that to you. So they don't catch you off guard and those kind of things. So keep them focused. The ones that ask, well, what about my friend used a ballpoint pen and took it out and cut his throat, and I'm like, yeah, we're not going to do any of that stuff. Let's talk about that later. I'll explain to you what was going on and why that worked, but So that's kind of how you do that. You got to keep everybody focused and keep them on what you need to talk about. But the other reason why you want to know your level and 1 or 2 levels above is because you can, and when a question comes up about the level that you're teaching, it may affect something down the line. So it gives you the knowledge of being able to say, well, yes, you can open the airway in that method and maintain it because it will help with this and this later on. So it does help. Or no, you can't, that's not a good way to do that because when the EMTs get there, it's going to cause a problem with the EMTs. So that's another reason why you want to know 1 or 2 levels above. Perfect example of that is, to me, as a middle manager, somebody who, like a supervisor, for example, an EMS supervisor, they need to know 1 or 2 levels above them. They need to know what's important to the people above them. Because if a medic on the truck comes up and says, hey, can we do this? They don't have to go to their boss and go, hey, can we do this? No. Most of the time, the supervisor can go, oh, yeah, that'll be fine. Or they can say no, because they know that it will affect these other things down the road that are really outside of their scope, outside of their management area, but I understand it and I know, so I can make that decision here and never have to pass it up the chain. So it's kind of the same principles. So that's kind of how you handle, that's one of the best ways to handle those students, is always know what they need to know 1 or 2 levels above. And then keep them focused, keep them on task. If they ask questions that are above where they need to know, if you know the topic and if you know the answer to it, depends on how quick it is. Sometimes it's easier just to answer it and go on. Other times, you're like, let's catch me after class, at break or something, I'll explain that to you, but I don't want to confuse everybody else. So that's another way to do it. Speaking of confusing other learners, I did a lot of that when I first started science and math. I was an algebra nerd. Loved algebra. Absolutely loved it. Such a nerd in high school that when I would finish my homework, I would make problems up just to work through them. That's the kind of nerd I was. Absolutely loved it. Which says, drug calculations, I can show you 30 different ways to do a drug calculation. And that's what I would do when I would try to teach drug calculations. I would be like, okay, VD over C, and you do that. And I'd show everybody that, and I'm like, or you could do this, and the zeros cancel out this way, which then equals this. Or you can do it this way, and and next thing I know, I'm looking at the class, I'm like, how are you guys not getting it? I mean, this is easy. I've showed you like 50 different ways. That's why. I've showed you 50 different ways. Show them one way. Acknowledge that there are other ways. That's part of, and I'm real passionate about preceptors as well, and teaching preceptors. I'm doing a preceptor class right now. But as a preceptor, as an educator, first and foremost, be willing to acknowledge there are more than one ways to get to the answer. And you can tell the group that. It's okay. Everybody's different. I'm going to show you this way. Here's the way we're going to do it. And from here on out, I'm going to show you this method because I don't want to confuse anybody. Now, if you're an algebra nerd and you've got a different method that works for you, that's cool. Just keep it to yourself. If somebody is confused and you help them and show them, that's fine. All that matters to me is that you get the right answer. And there's different ways to accomplish that. But for simplicity's sake, we're going to show you one way. Putting on a KED. That's the example I use all the time. Is there a right or wrong way to put a KED on? Is it bottom, top, middle, middle, bottom, top, legs all the way up, head down to the legs? Does it matter? That question is to you. Does it really matter? Maybe the book, maybe the manufacturer. The manufacturer has a very specific method, and that is middle, I think bottom, then top. Who cares? The only thing that matters in putting a KED on for anything, and that's testing, and it does have some real world application, is that you secure the head last. Everything else is secured, then you secure the head. That's it. It's the only thing they need to know that is set in stone. But for simplicity's sake, I'm going to teach you this method. So students learn that one particular method. And back in the day when we did, you actually had to do skills at the state level. So when you went to the state, even paramedics, all they had to do was basic skills. They had to put a KED on, they had to do a basic splinting, you had to do basic CPR, and that was it. Okay? Back then, when you were evaluating them skills, you could tell from what school people came from by the way they put the KED on or the way that they did the traction splint. Because each school taught them a little bit different. And you know what? Every one of those students passed. It was different, and you could say you went to this school or you went to that school. Doesn't matter, because you teach them one method and let them learn from that method, but then acknowledge later on that, yeah, there are other ways to do that. And that's your job as an instructor, is to recognize there are multiple ways to get to the end, and most of them are correct. But for simplicity's sake and to keep from confusing people, I'm going to show you one method, this method. Drug calculations, for example, if you get a student who is confused, then work one-on-one with that student, and maybe then show them another method based on where they're confused and what's confusing them. Go, you know what, you could think about it this way and do it this way. That might work a little better for you. And that's okay. But just keep it to one and not try to involve everybody with multiple different methods. So I tell you what's really interesting, though, as an educator, and I've had to do it a couple of times, is when you get to the point that you look at the paramedic book and you're reading through it and the student goes, the book says to do this. It says what? Hang on. Okay, I need everybody to get a pen out right now. Go to this page, and I need you to strike through this in the book. That is absolutely wrong. And to see some of the students go, what? What? That book was written by somebody like me. Matter of fact, I've helped author several of them. There are mistakes sometimes. We make mistakes. People make mistakes. So, it's interesting to see when you do that and they're like, what? Trust me on this one, that is absolutely not correct. And sometimes it may be because things have changed so fast that, oh no, we don't put people on spine boards and do standing takedowns and all that stuff. We don't do that anymore. Studies have shown when somebody they move less by self-extrication. Rather than put them in the KED and try to turn them and do all that crap that we've done for years, studies have proven that the spine moves significantly less by simply having them self-extricate. Let them bring themselves out without moving, and they will move themselves a whole lot less than we will move them trying to drag them out of the car. So things change, and acknowledging that and acknowledging that there are multiple ways to get to the end is important.